Is Cinderella a social engineer? That terrifying monster trying to break into the office, or did he just forget his badge again? Find out with Work Bites, a new security awareness training series from Infosec. This series features a colorful array of fantastical characters, including vampires, pirates, aliens, and zombies as they interact in the workplace and encounter today's most common cybersecurity threats. Infosec created Work Bites to help organizations empower employees by delivering short, entertaining, and impactful training to teach them how to recognize and keep the company secure from cyber threats. Compelling stories and likable characters mean that the lessons will stick. So go to infosecinstitute.com/free to learn more about the series and explore a number of other free cybersecurity training resources we assembled for CyberWork listeners just like you. Again, go to infosecinstitute.com/free and grab all of your free cybersecurity training resources today. Today on CyberWork, we're talking about Chief Information Security Officers, or CISOs, one of the top dog roles in cybersecurity, and for many professionals, it's the brass ring that they spend their entire careers trying to reach. The expectations of a CISO are changing too, and requirements are growing in a lot of different ways. Michael Scott, CISO of data security provider Immuta, has seen the role change a lot in the last 15 years, and he's seen the role of CISO move from out of the shadows and into the spotlight for the C-suite, but at a price. When a breach happens, the CISO is often the one who takes the fall. Is this a reasonable expectation? Will the role of CISO change even more in the future? I talked to Mike about all of this, as well as the 8 years he spent as the CISO of the Wendy's fast food chain. It's true, I buried the lead. We won't judge you if you want to bite the corners off first, but I'll be crying in my chili if you don't keep it here for today's episode of CyberWork. Welcome to this week's episode of the CyberWork with Infosec podcast. Each week, we talk with a different industry thought leader about cybersecurity trends, the way those trends affect the work of Infosec professionals, while offering tips for breaking in or moving up the ladder in the cybersecurity industry. Our guest today, Michael Scott, is the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer of Immuta, whose mission is to make the future of data secure. Mike is a highly experienced and accomplished leader in information and data security, real-time analysis of immediate threats, and IT and infrastructure designs, previously holding positions as the Chief Privacy and Security Officer at Spirion and CISO at Wendy's. Yes, that Wendy's. He has a proven track record in developing strategic plans to protect enterprise information assets, mitigate risk, control cyber incidents, and maintain compliance with multiple regimes, including PCI DSS, HIPAA, and SOC 2. So today's episode, we're going to talk. We're going to drill right into what's required of a CISO these days. We've talked about what it's like to be a CISO in the past. But Mike came to us saying that CISO's responsibilities are changing, and let's find out why. So, Mike, thanks so much for joining me today, and welcome to CyberWork.
Oh, thank you for having me. Really excited about today's conversation.
Yeah, same here. A lot of this stuff is going to be completely new to me, and I love to learn. So before we start, or as we start, I want to sort of get to know about your initial interest in tech and cybersecurity. I mean, you're definitely on the, I would say, hard computer science side of some of our guests. Others, who do other softer skill things. It's any guess where they got interested originally. But how far back does your interest in technology and security go?
That's a great question. It's funny. I had to think on that for a minute because when I got introduced into technology was during the Commodore 64 days, and
all right. Team Commodore. That was my first computer too. Yeah.
My interest started more casual, right? It was entertainment, and it was. I tried a little of the coding and other things, but then I joined the military, and I was in intelligence in the Navy for a few years, and we really focused on data security, data transmission security, and things like that. And even still, that was not what I was thinking I wanted to do when I grew up. I got out of the Navy and was going to school to be an ecologist, believe it or not. And after a couple of years of school and working 60-hour weeks, waiting tables and doing all that stuff, a friend of mine called and said, "Hey, you should come work for this tech company. And they're just hiring veterans, and they don't care if you have, any experience whatsoever." And, got into that role and did a lot of networking and a lot of consulting with smaller businesses. And, one thing led to another into a startup called Witness Systems in Atlanta that I moved to. And we started having a need for a firewall. So that was my first foray into security, was implementing Cisco PIX Classic. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, no, other guests have alluded to it as well. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it was, you loaded all the software on a floppy disk, and it basically ran off a floppy disk for the most part. And really, from there, I got really interested in the security aspect of the role. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of security positions. It was still, we're talking, AOL was sending CDs out still, when I got into my career.
Right.
So the more I got interested in, kind of the hacking side of it, right, the breaking things and figuring out how things work, the more I just really started championing for my own role within the startup I was in. And it clearly worked out. That was many, many years ago. I think I'm on like 26 or 27 now.
Wow, it's man, that's awesome. I love hearing the sort of Wild West days of security, or even the idea of security, because there is that point where it, like you said, there's no role for it, because it's probably not even really a full-time piece of work at that point. Like you either turn on the firewall or you don't, or you you put a few things in place and then you cross your fingers and count to 10 and call it good. But you don't have the sort of labyrinth of possibilities that you have now, right?
Oh yeah, I think I spent some time at Optiv doing some consulting, and we had this slide that kind of dated back to the early 90s, and there were like 8 or 16 solutions, period. These are your choices.
Yeah. A la carte menu. All right. So moving on to your career profile, like usually I'll sit here and pick through all of past jobs and what did you learn from them and so forth. But obviously there's one role, and our listeners would throw me out a window if I didn't ask you about it. But from 2008 until 2016, you were the Chief Information Security Officer for the Wendy's company of Dublin, Ohio, which is, as we said, Wendy's, the burgers, Frosties, the chili. So can you break down what this role entailed and what it meant at the time to be the CISO of Wendy's? Like, what kind of problems were you addressing and solving? Was this something that was happening? Were you the CISO of like the corporate aspect or the franchises as well?
So when I started at Wendy's, it was actually after the company that owned Arby's restaurant group that I worked for was acquired, and they created Wendy's Arby's group. But it was funny when we were talking about the need for security. When I was first hired, they said, "Hey, we've got this PCI thing we want to do, but we don't think security is a big enough role and enough work here. So we're going to need you to also manage telecom, unified communications, networking." And I think it's kind of funny how, that even then they're really looking for somebody technical who could do a lot of work. And oh, by the way, we need the security and compliance thing.
Right.
And so, as really the first problem I had to solve when I got there was helping them understand what security was, why it was important, and also why, if they followed my lead and we really were proactive, things would be easier. And I remember my first project for PCI, showing a slide of a dog jumping through a burning hoop and saying, every time we make a change just because of compliance, this is what we're doing. We're doing the Circus Act versus let's take a step back, build a foundation on defense in depth. Let's get a really mature program, and compliance will just be easier.
Got it.
And, and that's the problems we were solving, is that all of that started making sense, but then you're on a pennies to the dollar revenue model, right? And so how many hamburgers, I can't tell you how many times I heard, how many hamburgers do we have to sell to pay for that?
Yeah. Right.
But it's a fair question as well, because one of the things I heard from a mentor of mine in the past was, protect your diamonds like they're diamonds and your pencils like they're pencils. It really, I had to start solving problems of how to build a world-class security program that was cost-effective and maintainable with about 1,700 locations. So my role involved all of the corporate locations, all of the company security. And then towards the end of my time there, my team actually built a managed service for the franchisees. So we were doing managed patch management,
got it,
AV, firewalls. And really what we saw was that the business, from a franchise perspective, they did not have the expertise and a lot of times the funding. And so building that program out really was going to launch kind of the next phase for Wendy's and their technology. But we also had a lot of the same problems other folks had, right? Like I remember building our first data lake and having, big data and in the early years of having, how do we unlock this data? How do we use this data? And, I have to admit, even in that role, there were a lot of times where I would say, we really shouldn't use that data. And here's why. We don't have an effective way to control it.
Yep.
And, by the time I left, Wendy's no doubt had a great program, and I stand on that based. I still do every once in a while go and search for the data breach that occurred within my last year or so. There was all franchise based. To this day, when I Google it, I can't find any details about what happened, and that is a successful breach handling, in my opinion.
Yeah, sure. It didn't get leaked to the tabloids. Yeah,
there wasn't a whole lot of talk there, but I think it really taught me a lot of things about how to look for more reproducible security rather than latest and greatest. So I'd say a project we had that failed there was putting application whitelisting on every point of sale. And sure, it's a great security control and, it does a lot of great things. But what we found was operationally, it was killing the team. They were not able to support the systems correctly.
Yep.
And so we were constantly in this state of disabling security controls to test things. And we made a decision to actually back that out and just put standard antivirus and HIPs on the workstations. And our number of events went down and our operational stability went up. And it was a good lesson for me, right, of going, and sometimes you just have to take a more simple approach based on the risk.
Yeah. Put down the bazooka and pick up the fly swatter. Yeah,
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, well, two things that I wanted to sort of highlight from your responses and how you were definitely kind of ahead of the curve of you were thinking about things that are currently in the conversation. One is that if you create a good security posture compliance thing, you don't need to do the checkbox compliance thing. You're already ready there, and we talk all the time about not working towards the checkbox and the compliance, but like you said, building it out and then you don't need to worry about it. And the other thing was, don't use the data if you don't have a safe way of doing it. Like I feel like that's a reckoning I've only been hearing about in the last couple of years here. So you were definitely ahead of the curve in that regard.
Yeah, I can't take all the credit because I will say as a brand, I had a lot of support there. And I think so that is so critical. And so these are not, I don't have decision-making authority even in my current role, right? I'm an advisor and part of the business. So I did benefit from having a team to work with at Wendy's executive level to say, here's the risk, here's the reward, here's what I think, and to have that trust and have the business side with you, that's a huge win. So, but I think that's also an equal thing, right? Is learning how to build those relationships and build that trust so that the business appreciates when you're saying no. It's the last step. It's not something I like. I always taught my teams, we're not the department of no. Before you say no, come to me because I want to figure out how we can make it a yes if possible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that I'm glad we talked about data security here because that moves right into the present day for you. I mean, for the past 2.5 years, you've been the CISO at Immuta, which is a cloud data security service designed to help organizations unlock value from their cloud data through protection and secure access. And so we had a previous guest on, Shay Wijasinga, who came on the show to talk about nuanced collection of user data and emphasize that without data security, all of this data collected can either lead to catastrophic data leaks and associated monetary and reputational damage, or like you said, it sits stored away somewhere, unable to be fully analyzed for fear of, something happening in the first place. So you're either running the risk or you're hiding it because you're afraid of the risk. So this type of data security is unquestionably going to go from quite important to mandatory as the years go on. And there's a lot of programs we solve to make this set it and forget it prospect. But as CISO of Immuta, what are the types of information security, cloud security, and data security problems that you're actively working on trying to solve or perfect?
Do we want to focus on internal or as a company as a whole, or maybe both?
Both. Yeah.
Sure. So internal, I think interesting what we see is, when you're talking about it, dead on mandatory. As an emerging security provider, our customers are some of the largest in the world, and they don't care about our size. They expect us to be secure. They expect us to understand privacy. So one of our most recent projects I just wrapped up was our ISO 27001 and 27701 certifications. As you know, international data security and privacy standards. But that was a huge win. That was about 6 to 8 months of my time and the team's time. And I think, really the cool thing about that, and I guess the thing I really appreciate, this was my first ISO certification I've done, was it was much more of a cross company thing versus SOC 2 and other things. Most of the time my team can lead a high percentage of it. And so stemming out of that, we've got a lot of projects right now on, what we talked about before, simplifying and automating. And, one of my focuses on how to make programs successful is trying to use the processes that the business already has, and so, example, if you're working out of Jira for all your tickets, I don't want to come bring a GRC platform in. I want to use your tool because I want it to be easy and just work the way you work. Some of the other things we're working on internally is, with Executive Order 14028 from Biden, as a software company, we're clearly impacted. We have a lot of public sector customers. And I think really that's going to roll downhill into most people. But also trying to see how FedRAMP is evolving with that, and just trying to keep track of, what we're going to do in a federal space, because as you know, that rolls down into corporate a lot of times. NIST is highly respected, so it's a great framework. And then probably the last thing internally is really our shift left. We have spent the last 2 years taking our application security, and I'm just now an approver in the end, which was a fantastic journey. And we've really started to wrap that up, where now all of the hardening and all of the security, requirements, everything is starting from engineering. And they're now coming to me and saying, hey, is this right? This is what we believe we need. And I think that's going to really play into, the conversation as a whole, because what that's allowed me to do is take a small team and do incredible amounts of work by shoving that out into the business and the people that can affect it most. From a product side, really excited about what we're doing with our new announcement this year with our data security platform. Really, we're working to increase that visibility and bridge the gap between people like me at the CISO and security level with the data operators and the data operations teams. A lot of my challenges I see working with customers is data operations and security. We have the same problems. We just need to solve them for different reasons. And there's not a common language, and CISOs are struggling to have the time to devote to the data ops team to meet that requirement and meet that, demand and velocity that they're trying to access data. And so we've really created a platform that unlocks that and provides data teams with a lot more flexibility. And I think, to me, that's exciting as a CISO, right? We want to be part of the mission, and we want to be important to what we do as a company. Really seeing that we're starting to make security teams be able to trust data operations and leverage our platform and leverage the monitoring and the logging and all the analysis to be able to approve, yes, you can unlock that data. And one of my favorite examples of, probably not the company's favorite, really is mine, is at one point we helped a company unlock a ton of HR data. And they had, it was that silo that was, you can't touch this because it's PII. And being able to come in and put the appropriate controls in where they could start looking for trends on why are people leaving, why are people joining, what are our problems. And as you and I know, that talent shortage is a real problem, and not just security. So that's a great win. So I love what we're doing there. I think it's really exciting for the data community.
I just want to jump back a little bit on one thing you said. Through a fluke of booking, I ended up talking to, I think, like 5 DevSecOps professionals in a row or something. And so I feel like enough times passed that I can say things like shift left without my brain overheating and steam coming out of my ears. But I'm just curious what you mentioned just that engineering is coming to you sooner with suggestions. But what is your specific shift left strategy, and how are you integrating it in a way that's not sort of disruptive to the speed of the program?
Of course, leveraging our native tools was a big thing. But as we started to look at what we were going to use for application security testing, I spent a lot of time with the developers and the engineering leadership, and they were actively involved in that project. So, not only when we came down to tool selection, they had a bigger vote than I did, because I need an outcome. And whether that was Sneak or X or Y, it didn't matter as long as the outcomes were the same. And so by enabling that and really starting to put that, now it's completely automated, so scans happen on check-in, all these things are occurring. what we started seeing is the quality of the product went up, the number of the vulnerabilities went down, and the engineering team really started to see that, security didn't have to be a roadblock for them if they were proactive. And they've taken that and ran with it over the last year and really started putting in like our container. We're heavy on Kubernetes. Our container hardening is now embedded in that team. And I think so a lot of it was embracing their processes, understanding their needs and what they have to do and what the business expects from them, and partnering to come up with the right solution that allowed us to move the needle forward. And what we've seen the return on that is, the customers, and we do business with a lot of huge customers internationally. They love what we're doing. And when we start talking about how we do things, we get a lot of compliments on that. And I think it just continues to build not only the competence, but the desire from those teams to execute.
Yeah.
And I've seen this, and I would love to say this is the first time, I've seen this, but we did this at Square Hamburger Company. And we were going to build a mobile app, and we had all this, marketing funded this great space. And so we went in early and had the conversations about where we need to be and, why security needs to be somewhere. And we had a bit of a false start. And we had the beta version that we were going to launch of the app at a customer event, really more of a franchise event. And we had to make a few last minute things, but it kind of solidified, hey, if we don't do security right, it's going to slow us down. And so as we kind of analyzed that project, thought, how can we fix this? We made the decision to embed one of my security team members in the development team. And they spent a year literally reporting to the same office, sitting at the same desk, part of that team. And that program now, a great friend of mine leads the red team and blue team side, I believe, still. They've evolved that from where we were having annual capture the flag, like OWASP training that was mandatory.
Right. Okay.
Now he has people dying to sign up for this class. And so, you see the power of developers every year going, no, I want to devote a whole day to just trying to figure out how to break our application and learn from it. It's really, really powerful. And so I think taking that momentum that my team built, at the burger company really kind of helped me with this. But I think that's ultimately, we have to be business partners. That's how you shift left, is you have to, we have to make a release, we're agile. How do we do that?
Boy, yeah, I think that might be the first case that I've heard. Maybe I haven't dug in deep enough where it wasn't just a complete bashing head situation, and that ultimately is what it comes down to. I was like, well, how can we do this in a sneaky way so that our developers don't even notice that it's happening or whatever? But if you can get to a point where they're actually excited about sort of contributing and seeing the results and not being the Dr. No kind of thing and waving your finger all the time and stuff, I guess it's possible.
Well, and we also taught, and I think now developers, I think this is less of a problem because developers realize today what we were teaching 7 or 8 years ago, which this is a tool in your toolbox. This is a skill on your resume. Being a secure developer and being an expert in OWASP and application security makes you more valuable as a developer. And I think that's more known today. And so it's really, for me, it's interesting when you go into a shop, and as I've done consulting over the years, you're right. There was this headbutting and no, we don't want to do it. And, we need to deliver features faster. Yep. But I think also customer expectations have evolved to the point where, we do a risk assessment for every prospect and customer. It's last year, that wasn't the same case. We might get a risk assessment from the big insurance company, but not from the tech company. Now, it's just common. You're going to see, whether it's SIG-Lite, CAIQs, or custom risk assessments. So customers are expecting it. And I think developers are realizing that this is just a must do. So I might as well capitalize on it.
Yeah, love it. So I want to turn from your specific roles and responsibilities to the more philosophical notion of the chief information security officer or CISO. You came to us to discuss some certain ways that the role and the perception of the CISO role has changed pretty recently. To put your words back at you, CISOs today are facing new challenges and increasing workloads consisting of more paperwork, time spent on risk assessments going from 2 hours to 30 hours per assessment, and growing privacy regulations. At the same time, CISOs are being held more accountable for the security actions or inactions taken by the business. This struggle is only going to get harder given the new mandates and requirements laid out in the Biden administration cyber strategy. So let's start with the comparatively distant past. What was the CISO role like when you started, and how has it changed in the meantime as regards expectations and responsibilities?
Yeah, the CISO role is kind of a unicorn when I started.
Yeah.
If you ran into somebody who had that title, they were traditionally, the Fortune 50, maybe in banking. Most of the rest of the security practitioners out there were managers or directors, part of the IT team. But you didn't see executives as much, and you really didn't see security being anything more than kind of like the utilities. We need to do it. We need to do just enough. But at the end of the day, it wasn't really a business enabler. I think for a lot of us, as we got into security, it was also technical skills were a must. No one was looking to hire a CISO or a director of security that couldn't also come in and do some work. So it was security and. I think, even my role at Witness, which is one of the first startups I started at, it's now Verint. I was employed 20 something, and along the way, I started pitching the idea of, hey, we need a dedicated security role because some of our customers have this, and spent a lot of years in the CEO's office really advocating for, at least a director level role. And, that eventually happened, but even still, it was kind of like what a lot of folks were probably experiencing today, but for sure 10 years ago, where I still reported to the CIO. The CIO took care of all the contract stuff, all the other things. And I was much more just a part of his or her team. And we didn't have visibility. The board didn't care what was going on in security. It was the same thing as facilities. Right. Does it work? Great. I think today the role has evolved to the point where those technical skills, they're important depending on the size of the organization. And I think technical skills is really, can you hold the level below you and maybe 2 levels below you accountable? When you say, hey, I think we need to implement this, and they say, well, that's not possible. Can I interpret that and go, I disagree, or, okay, let's talk about how to make it possible.
Yeah.
It's not about, I can't log into AWS and create an instance. That's not my skill set. But I know enough to ask the questions and maybe be annoying and to get to the root of the answer. So I think technical skills are important, but they're no longer going to get you into that role. The business skills and the soft skills are so critical to success. And I do think, I believe that's a lot of how I succeeded in my role, is I had a background in public speaking and doing some other things. And so I was able to, go in and at least have conversations where my motive was for the right reason and help the business understand. But today, folks are looking for, educators. They're looking for, can you teach other teams what we need to do, why we need to do it? Can you translate a really hard requirement into something that every user in the company can understand at a minimum when to ask questions? Communication, I think, I say communication probably in every answer, because ultimately, what we do interrupts business. We slow things down. We create more work for other teams. It's just part of the job and unnecessary. It's a necessary, part of our job. But, we really have to communicate the why, especially with engineers. We need to do this. And then the partnership side of that. So I think soft skills are really, really critical. Risk management is definitely increased. I've worked at a lot of orgs where we didn't do risk assessments because we just fixed all the problems because it felt like the right thing to do. Well, that was back in the days when there was 8 or 16 solutions on that slide.
Yeah, so right. Yeah.
You can just buy everything.
Yeah. You're not making number 17 and it has to be a whole book. Yeah.
Right. And so now, there's a plethora of controls and approaches. And G&A is still, a big area that we have to control as far as what things cost and how we execute on them. So I also think, agility and a real understanding of how to break a problem down is kind of a critical need nowadays. I know whenever I talk to, our customers, when we talk about how they're solving their problems, there's no one fit answer for everyone. But, once you can align your solutions and align what your strategy is to how the business succeeds, you start getting a lot more people listening. And then I think ultimately having the thick skin that most of us have just to be able to share a message, maybe it didn't get heard, say it again in 3 months a different way, maybe a different way in 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
You may have to chip away, but the more you have those cases where you show that, hey, I had a good idea.
Yep.
We chose to go another direction. Let's figure out why. And, sometimes that's on us too. And I think that's, to me, that education part of being able to say, I don't think I explained that the right way. I went into an executive's office and said, hey, this is a risk. And, executives, that's their whole job. The CEO deals with risk every day. And so an unquantified, we're at risk, to him doesn't matter, or to her doesn't matter.
Yeah.
First, being able to go, this matters because, and this is how this impacts our business. So, that communication side is just such a critical component of success today.
Oh, that's great. It's interesting. Like you said that when you started, you were pretty much asked not to speak. Like if it's working, then we don't need to hear from you. And now it's sort of the opposite. Like you need to tell us, like help us understand what to do next, kind of thing. So. Yeah.
Well, there was plausible deniability for a while. Now that board of directors are held accountable and CEOs are accountable, it is a little bit different. But that head in the sand approach was very prevalent when I started.
Yeah. So speaking of risk and unspecified versus specified risk, what are your thoughts on the CISO's increasing oversight over risk assessments and privacy regulations? I mean, does this change the nature of the work that a CISO does? And if so, does it prevent them from working on things that they really should be working on? Or do you think that moving this role in, because you said that obviously the sort of consensus builder and the talker is a big part of it, and that makes sense. But do you think that the sort of risk assessor and the sort of like risk storyteller in this regard is an appropriate sort of add-on to this position?
Yeah, especially if you're trying to break into this career, right? Because most of us, if you're gonna go to a JPMC, Morgan Chase type environment, they're going to have a risk department, but and they're going to have even a cyber risk team, but most of us are not going to go into those roles. And so someone has to take on the idea of risk assessment, at least, at an IT and data level. And it's really an effective skill to also be able to help translate like this problem. These are the ways it could affect us, and this is the outcome. And how do we fix that? Is just most of us are going to have to know that, and luckily there are a lot of great resources out on doing risk assessments. And I think when I first got into it, it seemed so, cloak and dagger and smoke and mirrors. And it was, and because I think a lot of us, you want it to be like A plus B equals C, and risk assessments are subjective ultimately. And so once you get comfortable with that and put some frameworks in, they become easier. But absolutely, all the compliance regimes like ISO and stuff are looking for risk assessment. And I think ultimately that helps us as leaders balance. Am I being too paranoid? Am I really, the conversation I want to have with my executive team is about risk and not about controls and not about technology and not about other things. It's just, these are business problems we need to solve. Do you agree? Great. I'm going to go solve these. I think privacy is interesting because for a lot of us, especially, if you're in a small organization, there may or may not be a privacy officer or even a privacy function. And I do believe that CISOs are at least best equipped in most organizations to start the program, to highlight the problem, get a few things in motion. But ultimately, a colleague of mine said it best, the person who is in charge of privacy should be the closest to the data. The people who really understand what's in that data lake, what do we do with it, how we do it? Because I think that is the thing. Privacy continues. For me, I've been dabbling in privacy for 4 or 5 years now and responsible for it, a couple of orgs, but I still depend heavily on attorneys and consultants, and like we have legal engineering within our company because it's not what I grew up in, which was keeping bad people out and letting everyone that should have access have access. Now with privacy, we're really focusing on, do you have a legitimate use for this data? Do we have contracts in place for this data? What are the impacts? And that really starts to stretch a CISO's background and, quite frankly, our understanding of the business. I don't live in data operations. So I think we're good at starting, but I don't think ultimately that should be in our role. And I think you hit on something great. If you're going to do more, work somewhere else, you have to take away focus on something. And so CISOs that are being asked to build privacy programs or, different things like that are having to take time out of their day and focus on that instead of the other things. And so that's also goes back to risk assessment, right? Of like knowing what can I let slide, or what can I delegate, what can I offload, and that for me has been an effective strategy that I've had over time, finding those things where I have a third-party compliance partner who runs my audits for me. They're cheaper than a full-time employee. They keep everything administrative in line, and I'm just going to a meeting once a week. That was a huge lift off of my plate to allow me to start focusing on this. But ultimately, at Immuta, we landed the same place anyone's going to land, which is we've got a program started. We're going to use someone else to maintain it. We're going to bring a resource in. We're going to leverage somebody internally. It's not going to be the CISO's job. But I also think, privacy can't exist without security. And so there still has to be that relationship.
Yeah. People who are curious about the privacy aspect of this work should check out our CyberWork Live webinar episode from last year. We had 3 of our privacy instructors talking about it as a role, and there's enough there, especially if you're working for a company that has branches in different parts of the world. Like there's 7 to 10 different privacy standards that you need to be conversant in. So obviously, like you said about being able to sort of negotiate with the people 2 levels down from you, I feel like that's like know enough about privacy to know that you need to get a privacy person in here to handle privacy full time. Yeah, and use your CISO negotiating skills to make that case to the board, I imagine, right?
Yeah, and it's going to be different for every org, right?
Of course.
At Immuta, we don't do we don't do business with consumers. So we're strictly B2B. So our privacy program is pretty light. But when you start looking at weekly, I get questions from either customers or prospects of, do you meet this standard? Do you meet this new Australian data standard? Do you meet this Colorado standard? And someone has to be able to confidently know that answer and respond. And there's a lot of time in that and a lot of maintenance of that. And so, whether it's a full-time resource or, a third party that helps out, ultimately privacy does need a little bit more expertise than I think we bring to the table naturally. But absolutely, we could be a great starting point for it. I definitely don't want any CISO to get forced into being the privacy officer after hearing this.
Yeah, absolutely not. And as we talk about on here all the time, looking for people who, we cater to people who are trying to get into security from other places. Legal is a really good place to sort of transition from the law into privacy, because it's just like one step over the border there, and suddenly your skill set translates like 90% over to what's already there. You just need to know the new lingo,
Yeah, I do spend a lot of time with attorneys. I think that's why my kids think my job's so boring.
Yeah, right. They can hear you through the Zoom call, and they hear someone droning on the other end of the line. Yeah,
exactly.
Part. Yeah, right.
Clause 17.2.b.
So I want to go back to something else you mentioned in your statement above. You mentioned the fact that CISOs have increasingly become the here in an organization where the buck stops. So, the buck stops here, and often with disastrous consequences. And you don't hear it a lot in the news anymore, but I've read stories about CISOs being asked to resign after a breach because it was felt that it happened on their watch, or they were insufficiently prepared for any and all eventualities that could befall a company, and much like the changing responsibilities of the CISO, like you said, in terms of taking on like privacy and compliance work, it seems like the issue of firing the CISO to save face is something that originates from the C-suite, who may either not know what the CISO is supposed to do or don't want to invest in time to find out. And you said, like, that's just not viable anymore. But as we get to this sort of highest level CISO talk here, Michael, could you speak about the way for a CISO to recenter the relationship with the C-suite as an expert on specific tasks, and someone who would actually be the best help in steering a company even after the worst breach rather than the first to walk the plank?
I feel like I've been personally impacted by this one, so I think it's a great question.
Okay.
It's not. I could never say for sure, but you can put the timeline together between breaches and new career changes on my LinkedIn profile. And I think looking at that, and I spent a lot of time reflecting on if that were the case, what could I have done differently? And, after such a long run, there's also the inevitability. Something's got to change, when you've been a CISO somewhere for 8 years.
Yeah, right.
I think the biggest thing that I learned was that the executive team, they believe that you have everything covered. Especially if you've got certifications and, you're PCI compliant or your ISO or whatever, and they don't understand that, we're always playing this leapfrog game with attackers, right? Where we're proving they're getting better, and it's continual.
Yeah. Arms escalation. Yeah.
As I learned that it's so important that we also help the executive team understand what our role is.
Yes.
How we work, how we impact things. We can't make the company secure by ourselves. We have to have their support. We have to have the technical team support, but also help them understand, at the end of the day, we're advisors. We're just like the CEO. We're making an educated decision about what needs to happen. And we can't always predict the future. But also, I think, especially from a breach standpoint, of helping them understand what should your role be? Because I can look back and could see that I think my team expected me to be the boots on the ground and doing daily updates during meetings, because we did daily meetings for, I think, 3 or 4 months. And that really wasn't how I saw what I needed to be doing. I still had a business and a program to run, and I had a great team who was killing it. But there were definitely some commentary where it was like, oh, we really, it looks like this person's leading this breach response and not our CISO. And it was kind of, and of course, these are things maybe I heard in the background that I shouldn't have heard. But regardless, it did make me think, you know what? It was unfair of me to expect them to really know what they should be expecting from me. And so I think the more we can sit down with the C-suite and really help them understand how we impact the company, what we're going to do for them, and so that they understand that, hey, let me show you this risk assessment. Let me show you that there's a lot of things we haven't fixed because we don't have budget for it. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
I also think spending time getting to know what they do beforehand. You need to know what the business does. You need to know, what's hurting the finance team, what's slowing them down. Are there things we could do? And if there's not something we could do, helping them understand that, hey, we're going to have to implement this change, and we know this is going to create some ripples. So let's proactively talk them out and figure out how we can both move into this easily and make it an easy transition. Because I think the more the business sees you as a partner, the more they're going to trust you.
Yeah.
But also the more that when something goes wrong, they're going to understand. At the end of the day, you've been executing and delivering great work, and you've been really trying to steer the company in the right direction. A bad person did something malicious, and now you've got to respond to it. But I think the business also has to understand is who is the best to recover from this. It's the person who has that intimate knowledge and knows how to take the things that you learned of that lessons learned and apply them back to the business. And I definitely think, you see like the Uber, CISO, and of course there were some decisions that he made on his own, but legal ramifications for a decision as a CISO, I don't think there's been a case of that before. And so if you think that that's surely going to continue, and I think, most of us, most CISOs are not compensated the same way that our CIO partners are, at least in my experience.
Okay.
So, if I take the hit for a breach, I don't have the same package that person has. And so I think for CISOs, a lot of us are kind of watching and waiting to see how this develops, because we know we have some accountability, but the board also has to have accountability, and the executive team has to be supporting us so that, I'm not getting let go because of a decision I made. A lot of times CISOs are losing their role or being asked to resign over a decision the company made.
Yeah, right.
So.
I was going to say that's another thing I wanted to ask is if, there's obviously there's nothing to be done if, once the decision's been made, but if you were to say, make the case, like you said, this is a risk and we're currently, with intention taking it on because we don't have the budget to sort of remediate it. And, but also sort of, if you were to sort of walk the C-suite through, if this happens, then we would do this, this, and this. Do you think that softens the blow, or do you think that in general, a lot of people in that position are just looking for someone to sort of, hoist and be done with it?
I think it softens the blow a lot. I do think the more awareness the C-suite has and the board has of the decisions being made, and if you're lucky enough to have, which is, that's been the best thing about my role at Immuta, is having a group of executives, at a security company, it's easier. I'm not going to lie.
Sure.
That when we have these discussions, they buy into it. But absolutely, I think at the end of the day, back to what I said in the beginning, they assume everything is working. They assume that you've done everything. And they don't understand the complexities and a lot of the decisions that we have to make. Like for myself, coming out of that previous experience, in our program, if I do a third-party risk assessment on something the business wants to acquire, I absolutely have the ability to say, I do not approve this. I reject this solution. And I've created a way for the business to go through our governance committee, and we have a conversation. The business owner says, I need this. This is why. I talk about why I do not think it's a good idea, or why I think that it's higher risk than I think we should absorb. And at the end of the day, the business makes that decision. And that has created a very healthy outcome, because we've had cases where I've said no, and the business said yes. Yes, we want to do this. Because part of my assessment is not just security and privacy, right? It's also, are they going to be around next year? Or, we're embedding this into something we do. And so there's some of that as well. But by building that healthy feedback loop and that real clear communication, I think, sharing that information, continue with executives, they have awareness of what I'm doing,
Right.
And I think at the end of the day, as a community, we've been trying to make sure executives know it's like, we don't fire bank tellers when the bank gets robbed.
Yeah, right. In a lot of cases, we don't fire the CEO if we didn't make enough money last year. There were external factors. It was the pandemic, it was this or it was that. This doesn't have to be so much of a yes no either. Frankly, a breach is not the end of the world necessarily, unless it's I feel like the part where termination happens is not in that it happened, but in the response to it, maybe. If anything.
You go like old school and look how Target was treated by the market, because their CEO, kept putting out bad information, just trying to shut the conversation
Smooth it
down.
over. Yeah, right.
And then, not too long after that, Home Depot has a breach. They handle it well. Their stock price goes up. Breaches don't have to be the end of the world. I think it has to be. At the end of the day, it has to be how you respond to it, and they're not fun to respond to. But it's ultimately it's how you handle it. And I will say, for me, I've been lucky enough that most of the organizations that I've worked for have had a strong ethics, as a company, and they really believed in what they were doing. And so that's what I used a lot of times to get interest in my conversation. At Wendy's, that was always a conversation. It wasn't always me starting it, but it was an easy way for me to explain, hey, our customers expect, Dave's Thomas mission was, this is why we need to do this. And, and it bridged that gap and with the executive team to understand, privacy and security aren't just what we need to sell hamburgers and get credit cards.
Right.
They're also core to how we treat our customers and how we enable the vision of our brand. Right. And so, for me, funny enough, I turned down that job at Arby's and then Wendy's the first time, because I was like, hamburger companies don't spend money. Food companies don't spend money. I'd never be successful.
Yep.
Luckily, a recruiter sold me a whole different sales pitch. And I was like, I love it. I want to apply for it. Same company. And then when I got in there, by negotiating and working with the executives, we came up with, probably one of the best experiences in my career.
Yeah. So we're coming up on an hour here, and I don't want to monopolize your time, but I want to dial it back to sort of like the beginning of a career, because, when we have, Infosec has, are the sort of standard 12 career roles, the common career roles, whether it's, penetration tester, ICS engineer, or, security analyst, secure coder, what have you. And they all have kind of a natural sort of pyramid. Once you do this, you do this, you do this. And there's something about CISO that doesn't feel like the same thing. It feels like you kind of acquire your skills in a lot of different roles. So, I mean, as you based on what you see going on now, what kind of skills or education or experiences would someone who sees CISO as the brass ring need to start working on now at the beginning of their career?
I definitely think the technical skills are important. Is what are you seeing in the market you're trying to compete in? Is cloud's going to be a part of everyone, so you have to understand that. I think it's important to understand multiple facets of technology and the business as well. It's not about being a master of everything. I started in networking. I've done some systems administration. I've done a little bit of other things, but I've never done programming. Yet I built an application security program. So a lot of those foundational things we learn along the way. So just having a couple of really good strong suits in technology and modern technology is really important. And then, right back to those leadership and soft skills, like try to find avenues, whether it's at your local ISACA, whether it's lunch and learns at your company, find ways to demonstrate leadership, ways to work on your soft and skills, whether it's written or verbal, and continue to build that and really work on getting feedback. One of the things that I always saw was, if I had a problem, where am I failing here? Going and working with other folks in the company and getting that 360 review to understand, kind of how I could grow. And for me, because of my natural curious nature over time, I started to learn what was important to the sales team, in sales facing roles, and what was important to the marketing team and other roles. And it's super helpful to be able to have that conversation and for the business to know, okay, you're not just a techie. You're not just some geek who walked in and wants to, lock everything down. You understand that I have something I need to do and you're going to work with me. So I think those soft skills make such a difference. I've worked with some fantastic technical geniuses and that I don't think I'd ever see them transition into being a leader because they don't have those. But I also say, you have to be passionate, right, about the whole, and you have to be passionate about helping the business succeed. Being a CISO is not about the security program succeeding. It's about the business succeeding. It's about being able to continue to show that value and how you're helping. And that creates stickiness, and it creates, quite frankly, momentum to push security through the organization versus constantly having to pull it.
Yeah, love it. So we're coming up to the end of our hour here, Mike. But just real quickly, I mean, this can be lightning round if you just want a few sentences. But I'm curious. We talked a little bit about the Biden administration's directives on cybersecurity risks within military and federal government, and we had a whole episode on the move to Pentagon becoming 100% zero trust and the federal government's sweeping mandate on asset discovery and mapping. And, and then of course we've had talking about CCPA and GDPR and privacy, frameworks and so forth. Do you feel that these are generally a step in the right direction in the sense of, like, if you were given the magic gavel to address all of these issues your way, would you be approaching it differently? Because you have mentioned that it sounds like some of it is a bit of a choke point and a bit of a challenge and so forth. But in general, do you think that these kind of big initiatives are necessary?
Yeah, I think unfortunately they are necessary, right? Because when you look at just our trajectory as a profession, the growth in CISOs and security professionals came as compliance requirements forced companies into doing something with the data they were doing. So I think they're necessary. I will say I've spent the last couple of weeks doing a lot of reading on Biden's executive order and all of the things from memos coming out, for procurement to what's going to need in an SBOM and everything. And I will say I think the approach that they took really makes sense, and that's what I would do. Is they took federal government, private sector, they had a consensus of what needed to be done, and now they're looking at standards. The NIST standard we've all known about, it exists, and so it's not like this new thing I've got to go figure out, and it's not so prescriptive like PCI where I have to go do exactly this. I can go solve the problem. And then I also love, the thing that excited me most out of my reading was that they're really looking at how can they leverage existing work that we've done, like our ISO certification, possibly to meet these. And I love that because, at the end of the day, the businesses need to be held accountable to protect us as consumers and as individuals. But ultimately, now that these laws are in place, we probably need to really push towards that federal, right? I think the one this year, like California and Colorado, both enabled rulemaking authority. Like in Colorado, the attorney general can now create new rules and enforce them for protecting Colorado citizens. And you think about the velocity of change there. There's no longer going through Senate and there's not all this red tape. You've got an individual who has authority to create something. And so we're going to see this evolve. And so that's the scary part, right? Is now I'm going to have to meet multiple states. But I think it's a great direction. I just hope we get to a federal level at some point.
Yeah. No, it makes me think of, people who are always annoyed. There's so much construction going on around the town right now. And it's like, the opposite of that is like we have crumbling infrastructure. So, yes, it's going to be a little painful. It's going to be painful for a while, but this is actually how you do things on a large level is you minimize the discomfort and then you do as much of it as you can, as fast as you can, I suppose.
Yep.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, you talked a little bit about Immuta's data security platform before. If you want to go into more detail about it or talk about some things you're excited about to unveil in the second half of 2023 and beyond, please feel free.
I think overall, just, our new product this year, as we roll out Detect and the ability to detect and prioritize risks within the data ecosystem close to the query and actually not only say, you've got this kind of data, this sensitive data, here are the risks. Oh, and here's the way you can apply a policy to protect that is super exciting because more and more seeing folks getting value out of that data. But also for me, when I visit a customer, talk to them and the CISO is like, oh, I love what you guys do. It takes so much off of my plate. I don't have to worry. That's amazing. Finally seeing the fruits of that and some of the research that we've done recently has been pretty amazing. So seeing 70% reduction in the amount of dedicated resources to provision access, I mean, that's huge. That 70% reduction means that you can now take those people and do something new with them. We're not trying to get rid of people. We're trying to build efficiencies. I think also, providing that faster data access. I love seeing that because as a CISO, I don't want to slow things down. So when you think about being able to support a tool that all of a sudden you come and go, oh, now we're getting data 2 weeks faster, new use cases a week faster. Those are huge. And our recent study that we released on that from Forrester highlights it. Everyone definitely should check it out. If nothing more, just from how should you be thinking about approaching problems? What are the things, how do you sell a solution in?
Nice. All right. Well, one last question here. If listeners want to learn more about Michael Scott or Immuta or that Forrester report you mentioned, where should they go online?
So for me, the LinkedIn, of course, I'm Mike Scott, CISSP. If you search Mike Scott and Immuta, there are a lot of Mike Scotts out there. And then Immuta is immuta.com, IMMUTA.com. Lots of great information out there.
Cool. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. This was so much fun.
Oh, thank you. It was super exciting. It feels like a Friday for me.
Yeah, right. You just blew my mind. I thought it was Friday. Here we are. One more day.
Thank you. I had a great time.
My pleasure. And thank you to all of you who have been listening to and watching the Cyborg podcast on a massive scale. We just broke through 70,000 subscribers and over 1 million visits since we started in 2018. So we're so glad to have everyone along for the ride. But before I go, I just want to invite you all to visit infosecinstitute.com/free to get a whole bunch of free stuff for CyberWork listeners. Our new security awareness training series, Work Bites, is a skit-based or story-based security awareness program that features a host of fantastical employees, including a zombie, a vampire, a princess, and a pirate, making security mistakes and hopefully learning from them. Also, if you go to infosecinstitute.com/free, you can get our free cybersecurity talent development ebook. It's got in-depth training plans for SOC analysts, penetration testers, cloud security engineers, information risk analysts, privacy managers, secure coders, and more. So lots to see and lots to do. All you got to do is go to infosecinstitute.com/free and check it all out. Thank you once again to Mike Scott and Immuta, and thank you all so much for watching and listening. And as always, we'll talk to you next week. Bye now.